So, today I want to talk about survival. I want to talk about what Americans have to do to survive in the United States when they're poor, the options that they have available to them. And especially during this pandemic, where things have only gotten worse, I think this is an important examination of the reality that a lot of Americans are living in right now. The Washington Post put out an article, Stealing to Survive. More Americans are shoplifting food as aid runs out during the pandemic. And I want to read a few of the stories that this article has, as well as some other information I want to go over after, that talk about the lived realities and experiences of people attempting to make ends meet in this economy. And in the economy, honestly, before the pandemic happened. The article talks about a story of Jean. In Maryland, Jean was successfully juggling college and a job, and she had just bought her first car when the pandemic crashed down like a sneaker wave. Her son's daycare center suddenly closed in April, forcing her to give up a $15 an hour job as a receptionist. But quitting meant she didn't qualify for unemployment benefits. She says she was denied food stamps at least 3 times and gave up on local food banks because of the lines. With no stimulus aid and her savings gone by May, Jean said she was out of options. So she began sneaking food into her son's stroller at the local Walmart. She said she'd take things like ground beef, rice, or potatoes, but always pay for something small, like a packet of M&Ms. Each time, she'd tell herself God would understand. I used to think if I get in trouble, I'd say, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't stealing a television. I just didn't know what else to do. It wasn't malicious. We were hungry, said Jean, 21, who asked to be identified by her middle name to discuss her situation freely. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's what I had to do. Jean's story in this particular case speaks to a number of different places that Americans can find themselves. One, if daycare centers close or become too expensive, you're put in a position where, especially if you are in a situation where maybe you can't afford to leave your job, where you're given a choice: take care of your kid or work. Under a lot of countries who sought out more socialistic programs and more social democratic programs, childcare was almost always one of the things that was declared a right so women could go out to the workplace. And even having a job of $15 an hour, that's not a lot to make ends meet in certain parts of the country. And she seemed to be pretty lucky, being able to manage college and a job, and a child. A lot of people can't manage that. But then, because she quit her job because of her circumstances to try to take care of her kid, unemployment doesn't kick in. She's in a place where food stamps won't accept her for whatever reason, right? Because it's arbitrary on some level. Either you're making just a little too much, or you didn't qualify for this reason or that reason. And in her particular case, food banks had lines all the way out there. You don't often have time to sit there on a line waiting for your food when you have to take care of your kid. So what do you resort to? Theft. You resort to theft because it's what's available. And you pay for the little things that you can. This is not a bad person that we're describing. This is not someone who's trying to take advantage of the system. This is someone who's trying to feed their kid and themselves. This is someone who got abandoned by this country. Do you think the $1,200 stimulus check was enough to take care of this person's livelihood? That one check over the course of 8 to 9 months? No, it wasn't. And unemployment was not something reaching this person. I don't know their situation in terms of renting, but if you're picking between rent and food, you're going to pick food. And if you're placed in a position where food can't be afforded, you're going to steal it. It's going to be what you do. Because if you've ever been without, you know what that feels like. And you're going to steal for your kid and make sure their belly's full even before your own. Moving on to the next story. Well, before we actually move on to the next story, I wanted to point out the statistic that the article points out. Though shoplifting tends to spike during national crises, it jumped 16% after the September 11, 2001 attacks and 34% after the 2008 recession. According to the National Association for Shoplifting Prevention, which tracks data from U.S. courts, the current trend line is skewing even higher, according to Reed Hayes, a criminologist at the University of Florida and director of the Loss Prevention Research Council. Why do you think, during disasters, theft goes up, and shoplifting goes up in particular? Maybe because people are panicked. Maybe because people are worried about job security. Maybe because people are actually in danger of not having enough. Maybe there's a tie between poverty and crime. Maybe poor people are more likely to commit crimes, and people who have just lost their job and are trying to keep some semblance of any condition of their way of life are more likely to commit crimes and take risks to maintain a full belly, especially in a country as rich as the United States. Next story talks about Sloan. In Virginia, Sloan, 28, says she's been dropping avocados, mushrooms, and other fresh produce into her bag without paying for them since September. She worries constantly about getting caught and takes only a couple of items at a time. But when you're eating cheap meals every day, sometimes it's nice to have an avocado to spice things up for one night, she said. Just read that again. Sometimes it's nice to have an avocado to spice things up for one night. Sloan, who asked to be identified by only her first name to avoid potential prosecution, worked in the food industry until the pandemic upended her job. Her partner, who worked in retail, was furloughed for months, then quit in August because it no longer felt safe going back to work. But the resignation meant no unemployment benefits. Things are bad, we're late on bills, we're late on rent, our car is 9 days away from being repossessed, she said. I'm used to being very self-sufficient, and it's awful feeling suddenly to be so desperate. Another example, where just to have a nice thing, to have vegetables, to have an avocado, is something that requires a person to steal in order to make ends meet. Being furloughed for months and then having to quit your job because the job opens back up and it's not safe or secure, because they're not taking precautions for a pandemic. That's the reason why you're supposed to go hungry? That's enough to not get unemployment benefits? Car payments behind, rent behind, bills behind? How is this person supposed to catch up? How is this person supposed to make ends meet without some sort of protection? What is the solution here? Are they supposed to just pick themselves up by their bootstraps and try to make ends meet? Stealing looks to be like one of the only options they have to make sure food's on the table. One more story. Alex graduated with a master's degree in May and was immediately in a bind. No job, no money, and with much of the country still shut down, little hope that anything would change. She'd spend most of her $1,200 stimulus check on rent and used what little she had left to buy groceries. Everything else, vitamins, moisturizer, body wash, she said, she shoplifted from a Whole Foods market a few miles from her apartment in Chicago. It was like, I could spend $10 and get a couple of vegetables, or I could spend $10 on a box of tampons, said Alex, 27, who asked to be identified by her middle name to speak candidly. She has a job now, earning $15 an hour, but still struggles to make ends meet. She says she continues to shoplift, something she'd never done before the pandemic, every few weeks. It's been very frustrating to be part of a class of people who's losing so much right now, and then to have another class who's profiting from the pandemic. Well, let's just say I don't feel too bad about taking $15 or $20 of stuff from Whole Foods when Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. Now, talking about this particular case, this is something that's, I feel like, is an issue that isn't really spoken about. Food stamp programs don't address the needs of people who menstruate. There is no government services for people who menstruate. There's no way for a person who menstruates to get pads or tampons. Should a person really have to choose between tampons and vegetables? Is that really the place that a person in the United States, the richest country in the world with our military budget, with everything that we spend on everything else, is that a place where somebody who menstruates should have to think about every month? Vegetables or tampons? I'm going to be real with you. If this was for a very different population, they'd get their needs. It frustrates me to no end. Furthermore, as this person talked about, the $1,200 stimulus check went to 1 month's rent and it's gone now. Vitamins, moisturizers, body washes, these are not luxury items that are being stolen or taken. These are necessities of life. In the way that we live in our daily lives, we need to clean ourselves. We need to keep our skin looking good. On some level, you want a job, you need to maintain that. You need to maintain a level of presentation. And vitamins? Vitamin supplements? I mean, that's just a necessity if you're not able to pay for enough food. Oftentimes, I've known people in my own life who have taken vitamins instead of buying food because the vitamins would at least provide them some nourishment so they wouldn't starve. This is something that happens in this country. This is something that still happens here. And even getting a job after all this at $15 an hour, you're still struggling to make ends meet. And this is a person with a master's degree. This is someone who worked their ass off to try to get to a place where they'd have, a degree that was supposed to promise them an opportunity at a good job. And where does that leave them? And I want to comment on this Jeff Bezos thing. I have an article here from Business Insider that shows that at the annual earnings rate, Business Insider calculated an estimation based on the change in his Forbes net worth year over year. Bezos has earned $6.54 billion a month, more than $1.5 billion a week, and more than $215 million a day, making a whopping $8,961,187 per hour, which is $149,353 a minute. You cannot tell me that somebody's earned that much money. You cannot tell me that when there's people starving and resorting to theft in order to have to make ends meet, you don't make enough to justify that kind of poverty in this country. You haven't innovated enough. You haven't done enough. Nobody can convince me that he has. And with that, I want to go to one last story from this article. Jean, the single mom from Maryland, said she shoplifted a few times before the pandemic. I know this was mentioned before, but I'm going back to her. Driving to a Walmart one state over for cans of formula when she couldn't produce enough breast milk for her infant son. She stopped once the store began locking up the baby formula, which retailers do because of its high price. When money became tight, she prioritized rent and car payments over groceries. My car, my apartment, were the things that could be taken from me. And then, where would that leave me and my son? She said. This is going to sound bad, but at least I could try to get food in other ways. Her mother sometimes helped, sending a few $100s of her own food stamps to pay for chicken and frozen peas. By the way, that's a crime. That right there is a crime. Her mother sending her money via her food stamps and sharing that is actually a crime. Her sending her own child and grandchild money off of her food stamps is technically a crime. That tided her over until July, where she got a big break, a full-time job in a new state making $16 an hour. Jean has health insurance now and donates to the local food pantry. She hopes she'll never have to steal again, though she says her sense of security is fleeting. You know what? That's what ends up happening. People who've been in poverty, when they get out of it, they tend to be some of the most giving and kind people. You're telling me Bezos couldn't give some of that money that we were talking about before? The fact that her own mother can't give her something legally, the fact that if they trace this to who she is, that she could technically, her mother could actually be prosecuted for that, is absolutely ridiculous. We live in really sick times. And I want to tie this back to something that happened back in July. AOC predicted all this happening. And I know I'm going back to AOC, but she seems to be one of the politicians that's at least talking about all this. She posted a tweet in July. Republicans are all upset that I'm connecting the dots between poverty and crime. I know most of them haven't experienced or seen these issues firsthand, but I have. This may be hard for them to admit, but poverty and crime are highly linked, both violent and nonviolent alike. Crime is a symptom of a diseased society that neglects its most marginalized people, and we do not solve that problem with police. Let me give you a real-life example that I've encountered often, wording vaguely to protect people. Growing up, I was friends with a boy who was the son of a single mom. They struggled to pay rent. As we know, hourly work doesn't pay a living wage, especially then. It's virtually impossible to pay rent on $8 an hour. And when you're a teenage boy in a fatherless home, his dad passed away, there's a drive to be the man of the house, to help your mom. And what makes money fast when a full-time job doesn't pay enough to live? Selling weed. For Black and brown communities, especially in the era of criminalization, the choice to sell weed, of course, is a risky one. Not just with police, but with those you get tied up with. Yet, when a teenage boy believes that the other option is homelessness, they may take the chance. Mind you, there are entire TV series glamorizing, humanizing, and sympathizing white Americans in this exact situation of selling drugs to live, weeds, Breaking Bad, etc. But fact is, Black and brown communities have been in this predicament forever and get called animals. I take this issue very seriously. Unlike many of GOP pundits theorizing from suburban homes, I've had multiple family members shot at, stabbed, etc. Crime and community violence isn't some thought experiment to project your thoughts and theories about communities you've never met. And I need to address this also. I know this isn't within the major scope of things, but when you look at who the heck is getting to own businesses, weed businesses right now, it is not people of color. It is predominantly not people of color, even though people of color have had to use this to survive and had to go under the radar of police officers, taking that capitalist risk in order to choose between homelessness and maybe a chance to keep their family afloat. You want to talk about risk in this country? If a person in a business takes a risk, they can get insurance. And if their business tanks, and if they mess up, they can tank the business, they can reinvest in the business, they can do all sorts of tactics to keep themselves afloat. And if they really fail badly, the worst case scenario is they become a worker just like everyone else. But this is risk. Ending up with possibly years in prison for a theft charge or for selling weed, trying to make ends meet, that is risk. And especially if you're Black and brown, and especially if you're in a community that has a ton of police in it, because, crime. You target crime, right? This is what crime looks like. This is why people commit crimes. And you want to know something else? AOC posted again on December 10th, reminding people of how the Republicans responded to her when she was talking about this issue. Remember when Republicans mocked me for wanting to talk, for warning about this? When I was called a fucking bitch? On the steps of the Capitol for discussing it? I don't like to curse too much in my videos. I like to keep it as PG as possible. But you need to hear that kind of language because that's what Republicans are saying about poor people. That is what Republicans are responding with when they hear about stories. And you know who said this? It was Representative Ted Yoho of Florida. That's the person who said this. No matter who it is, if they're living in poverty, if you're in this experience, I'm not on a platform where I can sit there and say specifically that theft is good. But I'm going to tell you, do what you need to survive. Do what you need to do to make ends meet in this coming time. Government isn't solving it. And as much as AOC might be genuinely trying, I don't think she has enough weight by herself. And even with the small representation of Democrats that follow the same ideology as her, I don't think it's enough. They don't care. And the Republicans certainly don't understand or care what it's like to live in a city, what it's like to live under certain circumstances, and what it takes to survive. They don't understand the level of poverty in this country, and they don't understand what people have to do consistently, the risks people take between crime and survival. We can do better. Nobody deserves to make as much as Jeff Bezos does. And everybody deserves food and shelter and medicine and care and respect and dignity. And that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. I'm angry. This country can do a lot better. And I hope you enjoyed watching.